Well, hi, and welcome to another of my live streams. This is actually the 6th live stream that I've done. It's amazing how quickly time goes. Thanks very much if you're joining me live. I really appreciate it. I can see there's already lots of comments coming in. Remember, if you are watching this live, please post comments, thoughts, questions into the little comments box, and I will come to those and try and get through as many of those as I possibly can in the next hour that we are live. If you're actually watching this afterwards, I really appreciate that. Quite a lot of people, actually more people watch it afterwards than watch it live. So that's great too. And of course, if you do have any questions, because you can't join the live stream, then please feel free to drop those as comments on the channel. I try and keep an eye on those. And I've actually got a whole bunch of those that I'm going to run through first. So basically what we're going to do today is I'm just going to remind you of the videos that came out this particular week. I'm going to then answer some questions that were posted on the channel that I think could be of interest to people. And then we'll get on to that comment section and start pulling those up. So just taking a quick look, we've already seen Greg and Dobbs, Nigel Greer, Hetty again. I think Hetty's probably 6 out of 6. Thanks, Hetty. KB in the UK, I think you're also probably 6 out of 6 as well, and a whole bunch of other people. So that's really, really great. So let me just remind you, first of all, about the videos that came out this week. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them, but I'll just touch on them very briefly and talk a little bit about some of the key things that they covered. So one of the first videos that came out was actually on Tuesday, and it was about cruise bans that had been lifted. This is looking at, I think it was 8 different places around the world where you could actually start cruising already. Of course, the big major cruising regions, which is the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, were not included in that, but there's places like Norway, Iceland, some European river cruising, Taiwan, and places like that had come on. So if you do want to see where you can actually cruise right now, assuming that you're allowed to fly places, which is a whole nother thing in itself, that's the one key video to watch. The other big video which came out last night, I actually just made it yesterday because it came out, which has caused a huge amount of discussion, and I'm sure perhaps some people will refer to it in the comments a bit later. And this was the following video, which is it was a big cruise update, and I called it massive cruise update because it is a really big cruise update, changes you won't like. And this was basically the European Union issued a massive, big, almost I think it was 50-page document. It's called version 1, so that's the good news. It's the beginning of a process, but it covered ships that are sailing in and out of ports based in the UK, and it was a whole series of guidelines. It was created in conjunction with, I think it was 38 or 39 named executives from the cruise industry, which included Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Viking, Costa, MSC Cruises, and also Clear Europe. Now, a lot of people watched the video. What it is, I pulled out 7 big things that kind of surprised me, and I thought people would also find a little bit unusual. And they're pretty big issues, ranging from the way they were recommending you look at social distancing, talking about separating age groups on board, with over 65 having to have some medical screening with their own doctor before they come on board, recommending that cruise lines should look at separating out older people, which of course was a massive big issue. Lots of restrictions around how many people could be in pools. What were some other things? Other things around encouraging people to eat in their room with room service. Only people traveling together could sit at tables. So if you're a solo traveler, for example. So lots of kind of guidelines. The important thing to note is these, what I thought was great news, was these were the first set that we've seen from any big regulatory body. So it is the EU, it's guidelines, and of course it's not finally what's going to happen, but at least there's now a document and a basis to start looking at opening up cruising. So that was a good positive, I thought. And then there was all those other issues. So that's a video that you may want to take a look at. It's certainly causing lots of discussion. So let's get into some of the questions and take a look at some of the questions. And what I thought I would do as people come on board, as people start leaving questions, I thought I would start by answering some of the questions that have been posted on the channel. So I'm going to pull some of those up, and these are in order, just with reactions to recent videos. And one of them, which I actually get quite a lot actually, is around Wi-Fi. So I thought I would just touch on Kamsicha. Maybe it's California. Anyway, what they were talking about is, I can't understand why in this modern age most cruise lines charge for Wi-Fi. And those of you who cruise a lot know that Wi-Fi can add easily $200 or more onto a cruise across a week. And a lot of people coming new to cruise, and I think particularly as younger people or people who are just more used to being connected, you go to Starbucks and you get free Wi-Fi. A lot of town centers have it. There's a segmentation that should be included. The good news is what we saw just before the shutdown is that more and more cruise lines were doing two things, one of which is they were acknowledging they need to have much better Wi-Fi. So we saw, for example, Princess with Medallion Net, which is amazing Wi-Fi, actually. I was on a cruise on Medallion Net as an aside, and I actually wanted to download and upload some videos, which normally is impossible. And it was as fast as my speed at home, which was amazing. So they're upgrading Wi-Fi, they're embedding Wi-Fi, Royal Caribbean, all those lot are doing it. But secondly, more and more are starting to bundle it. Now, we started seeing it originally with more premium lines starting to include Wi-Fi, like Ponant and so on. But what we started to see is that's becoming more and more included. So Oceania, for example, they started to include Wi-Fi. To be honest, their basic Wi-Fi is not great. You kind of need to upgrade, but there is a basic set of Wi-Fi. Virgin, of course, are making a lot of the fact that they are including Wi-Fi. So certainly you pay at the moment, but I feel like the momentum is starting to build to include Wi-Fi. One of the other questions that I got a whole bunch of questions around a video that I posted last weekend, I think it was, around cruise lines that I thought were good for 40 plus. And I had two questions, one of which was around Fred Olsen. What do I think of Fred Olsen and why didn't I cover Fred Olsen? And the other was around Crystal Cruises. So I thought I would touch on those two cruise lines for those of you who may be in the group that's kind of interested on those. First of all, Fred Olsen is mostly targeting the UK market. It's actually owned by the Fred Olsen Group, the Fred Olsen family, in fact, which I think are based in Norway. They're certainly in Scandinavia. And they have 3 or 4 ships. They have some river cruising ships. Fred Olsen is a very interesting line. When I've been on it, I've been on 3 times now, I think. They're quite good if you like a small to medium-sized ship. They're quite small. The ships are quite old. They're quite dated. They're very well maintained. It's a very, very traditional formal experience. So there's formal nights, tuxedos, very British. Tends to be a little bit on the older side. So they do, though, have quite interesting itineraries. They have a world cruise, which is very popular. And so Fred Olsen I like, but I'm sometimes reticent to recommend it because I think it's a very specific audience that would like Fred Olsen. And those people who like Fred Olsen love Fred Olsen. Whenever I've been on Fred Olsen, at the table I'm sitting, because you have very formal, fixed dining with the same table mates, they've got 5, 6 cruises booked ahead of them. So it tends to be a little bit older, very British, very formal, good prices though. Their fares are pretty reasonable. The cabins to me are a little bit small, a little bit dated, but certainly if you're looking for formal experience at good value, definitely Fred Olsen. Crystal Cruises is a great cruise line. The reason I don't recommend it as often is it's quite expensive. So, it's one of those ultra luxury lines up there with Seabourn, Regent 7 and it's a beautiful experience. It's very plush. When you walk onto a Crystal Cruises ship, you do feel that you kind of have arrived. And you can see where the money goes. As you like, they have phenomenal food. They have Nobu, really interesting people. So Crystal is a great line. I don't always talk a lot about ultra luxury lines because it's quite out of a lot of people's reach sometimes. It's a very expensive way of cruising, but it is a very beautiful line. So certainly if you're looking for that kind of experience, what I also like about it, it's very good service, but it's not very stuffy. It's not very formal. So, it's, but I do feel it's a little bit more formal than say a Seabourn. So Seabourn is less formal, a little bit more relaxed. Crystal, a little bit more, it's not stuffy, but it's a little bit more sophisticated, I guess, if that's the right way to cover it. Let me take another look at some of the other questions I had already in the system, and then we'll come and take a look and dip in at the comments. Again, if you're joining live, remember, please post comments, any thoughts you've got, questions you've got. If you have had a look at that video around some of the new guidelines that the EU are bringing in, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well. And of course, the real objective is to answer as many questions as possible. One of the other questions I've got, sorry, also linked to that best lines. The danger with always recommending lines is everyone wants to know why their favorite line kind of isn't included. But one of the lines that I do really, really like, and I have been on a couple of times, and it's a line that I sort of gravitate towards, certainly when I'm cruising sort of more socially, if I'm not thinking about what do I want to cover for the channel, is Oceania. Now, Oceania, the question that Valiant has asked is, do you think Oceania is a premium cruise line like Celebrity? Absolutely. So the way I look at it is you've got in the premium category, you've got the sort of mid-sized ships, or mid-sized ships, big ships. So you've got in there, you've got Celebrity, you've got Holland America, you've got Princess, Cunard's probably in that group as well. So it's that kind of premium experience, but it's sort of a ship around 2,000, up to, I guess in the case of Princess, 3,000 odd ships on the passengers on the newer ships. Oceania is small, so it's like Azamara. So Azamara is part of the Royal Caribbean group, which is Celebrity. So you've got Celebrity as their medium-sized, big-sized premium ship. And then they've got Azamara, which is their small ship. So it's probably about 600 passengers, around about that size, because they run R-class ships. So actually, both Azamara and Oceania, they have the old R-class, the Renaissance cruise ships, which I think are around 600 and something passengers. So it is premium. It's really good food. I mean, certainly with Oceania, they would argue that they have the best food at sea. They certainly have one of the highest, if not the highest, spend per passenger on food. So, definitely very premium. Again, it's kind of relaxed. It's not that stuffy. It's not that formal. I really like Oceania because I like, smaller ships. You get to know lots of people. There's really great people on, a really interesting mix of people. And they also have quite nifty sort of itineraries. So, Celebrity, if you're looking at Celebrity, which Valiant, I guess, is looking at, they are more limited on some of the ports they can go to. Oceania can get into sort of more nifty kind of ports. So another question which Jim had is, which lines have the best ballroom dancing? I've been asked this question a number of times, and one of the reasons for that is a lot of the cruise lines are starting to phase out that ballroom. So Holland America, for example, which Jim responded to on my video on Holland America, as they move more into the music walk, so they have B.B. King's sort of jazz club, blues club. They've got the Rolling Stone Rock Room. They've got Billboard on board, which is the sort of dueling pianos. They've got Lincoln Center, which is more classical music. It's sort of squeezed out a bit the whole ballroom dancing. If you're looking for lines that have really, really good ballroom dancing, to be honest with you, the best lines are the UK-based lines, which still have that very traditional experience, and a lot of cruisers who like that. So Cunard, without a shadow of a doubt, has phenomenal ballroom dancing, and they run it multiple times a day, live orchestra as well. Fred Olsen, which I mentioned earlier, is also particularly good. Saga, which again is a UK-focused 50-plus line, is very good. So those more traditional cruise lines. Now, P&O used to have, which again is UK-based, have a lot of ballroom dancing. I haven't been on their big ships recently, so I'm not sure how good those are. But certainly those Cunard, Fred Olsen, Saga are definitely the ones to look at. So let's take a dive in and have a look at some of the comments going back. And let's stop running through those. Again, please leave comments, leave questions, and we can make this as interactive as we possibly can. So let's start. I'll start right up at the top. So Greg and Dobbs have posted this question. It's a really interesting one, and I don't entirely know the answer. Well, I think I know the answer, so I'll tell you what I've seen. So Greg and Dobbs left a comment saying, we understand that Norwegian Cruise Line is giving Latitude members, so that's their frequent cruiser program, full credit for cancelled sailings. Impressive, absolutely. Have you heard of any other lines doing the same thing? Now, I haven't seen any other lines publicizing this other than the Norwegian Cruise Line. And so I haven't seen other lines picking it up, but I will definitely keep an eye out for that. But I haven't seen any other lines currently offering this. What I have seen is more what they are doing is on the other side, on the agent side, is giving them more and more support, even for cancelled cruises. So they're even paying commissions for cruises that get cancelled. So I'm seeing them putting more of their effort into the agent side rather than that side. But certainly if you are traveling Norwegian Cruise Line and you think you're booking Norwegian Cruise Lines, I think that tip from Greg's is a really good one. Nigel Greer, regarding the 48-page EU recommendation support, do you think there's room for negotiation if conditions improve? Nigel, I think what's very interesting about the document that the EU have issued with all those guidelines is it is definitely a starting point. And also it is at the moment guidelines rather than rules. And some of it, although it was developed with CLIA and the cruise line, some of it, when you read through it, it feels to me like people who wrote it still don't have a fundamental understanding of cruise ships entirely. So, there's still a slight disconnect in that. By the way, if anyone wants to read the full report, I've got a link in the notes of my video, the description of my video. There is actually a link to that report, and maybe I'll put it into the, maybe a little bit later, I'll try and before the end of it, I'll put it into the I'll pull it up and put it into the live chat. So anyone save you to go to the video. So I think it absolutely is the beginning of a process. So, and the good news is it's something out there that the cruise lines can negotiate with. Now, what's very interesting, Nigel, I'm not 100% sure where you might be based, but what Clear UK and Ireland issued is they, in their press release, they spoke about it as a marker. So as a starting point for discussion. What now has to do is that has to cascade into countries, because still country by country lines are going to have to negotiate that. And there are some things which I'm sure when you get into the detail will be really hard to see how that will happen. So I think absolutely it's the beginning of a negotiation. It's the first part of a process. And ultimately lines are going to have to negotiate with countries. So someone had also sent me a question, which I didn't pull up, asking, you know, this is an EU related document. So in the UK, it's obviously left the EU, but we're currently the UK is in a transition towards the end of the year when there will either will or won't be a negotiation. So it'll be a no deal or whatever. And they were saying, so will these apply to the UK? The document covers ships that are calling into EU waters and EU ports. So some of those rules and regulations will apply. A lot of them are around the whole way to handle outbreaks on board and getting people off the ship really quickly, and land-based quarantine hotels and things like that. So I absolutely think it is a negotiation, and it's going to be very exciting. And what I'm really excited about is, although it's some very troubling issues in there and it doesn't sound much fun as a vacation, but it's there's something out there. There's a document out there, so it's starting the process. The other thing I've seen, which is very interesting, about just a couple of days before this, is Saga Cruises in the UK. They came out and announced a date for their maiden voyage of their new ship, the Spirit of Adventure, and they in their statement spoke a lot about discussions they're having with the health authorities and the maritime people in the UK. So presumably those discussions are going on. So that's quite exciting. And let's have a look. So lots of people saying thanks for the reports this week. Robert, just a little side, where do you hail from in the UK? So I live in London. I've been living in London now for over 30 years. I originally grew up, by the way, if you ask me where originally do I hail from, I actually grew up in Zimbabwe. My parents moved there, and so I went to school in Zimbabwe and then moved back to the UK. Lots of people saying very kind comments, enjoying the videos, which is great. Frank, Gary, that's fantastic. Robert, annoying numbnuts. Australia, so I'm from Australia. I don't know what time it's in Australia now. Depending where you are in Australia, I guess it's the morning, I guess, in Australia, or very, very late. Michael's asking this question around any news when cruise ships will be able to sail from Spain again. Those of you who were perhaps on the live stream or watched the live stream last week or have seen the news, is Spain have got or announced an indefinite ban on cruise ships calling in to Spanish ports, which happened just before the last live stream, so about 10 days ago now, with no dates to update that. So there has been no updates and nothing set at all. So no news on the Spanish thing. But what's very interesting is you still look at a lot of the itineraries that are being sold still, they still all include Spanish ports. So unless the cruise lines know something else, or they're just speculating it'll drop. But we're seeing it starting to move quite quick now in the EU. You know, the UK today has announced the list of countries where people visiting from, or if UK residents go there, they don't have to go into the 14-day quarantine. A lot of countries in Europe have lifted the 14-day quarantine. So we're certainly seeing land-based traveling. So I think kind of watch the space. And hopefully this EU document will be a way of helping to unlock that as well. 2 a.m. Francisco, it's telling me in Melbourne, it's 2 a.m. So I guess in Melbourne, having an interesting time at the moment with some regional lockdowns. So hopefully that's not affecting you too much. Even Sao Paulo in Brazil, which was a very international crowd today, which is fantastic. It's great actually to do these live streams and a chance to interact with people and see where you're from and hear your questions. I don't know the answer to this question, but I thought I'd ask. A couple of people asked me this a couple of times about Japan. So Celebrity Millennium will sail around Japan in October. It's berth in San Diego. couple of people have asked me about what's happening with Japan, and we haven't heard anyone really talking about what's happening in Japan. I know they've just come out of their lockdown again. They're seeing some movement, but there's been no announcements from Japan. I've seen nothing about when cruises are restarting. The only cruises that are confirmed restarting in Asia at the moment are those out of Taiwan for Taiwanese guests. So I think it's going to be very interesting, because if it's October, September, July, where are we? People are going to have to start paying final balances soon, although a lot of cruise lines have reduced final balances down to 30 days and 60 days. And that seems to be increasingly a trigger point for when announcements are made. Again, about restarting, MSC have said they at the moment that they're talking about, they just did another round of cancellations and postponements. The last I saw was they were talking about towards the end of August. Again, it'll depend a lot linked to that Spanish issue, because obviously they're very heavily based in Genoa, for example, is a key part of their one of their home bases, and Spain is a big part of it. So I guess all of it's going to hinge around that port. Let's have a look. Thomas Enid is asking, I'm scheduled to take a 16-day Norwegian cruise, leaving Los Angeles, going to the Panama Canal, ending up in Miami in early November 2020. What are the chances of that cruise actually happening? Of course, I don't know what, and I think we'll get a real good sense within the next week to 10 days, I would say, at least. The reason I'm saying that is at the 24th of July, the no-sail order from the CDC in the US is due to expire. So if they don't do anything, kind of cruising could theoretically start up now. I don't think anyone thinks it's going to start up. That we've seen all the cruise lines, as you know, in the US, postponing everything through to the middle of September, or some to the end of September. But the CDC are going to have to make some sort of statement or come off the fence in some way. And the way that certainly we're seeing the numbers in the US with testing and the positive tests, etc., growing, it feels unlikely that there's going to be further reopening. I mean, we're seeing things closing down. So I think it's quite challenging. That the other challenge, of course, is the Panama are letting commercial traffic through. So, for example, I was going through the Panama Canal just as the shutdown happened. So we actually went into the Panama Canal after it had been announced that cruising was shutting down in the US. We went in, I think, the day after or 2 days after. Panama let us enter the canal, but we couldn't get off. So we were due to do a part turnaround. So we were going to go up to the Gatun Lake and go out on excursion. So Panama said the ship could go through the canal, but we couldn't actually get off. So it also depends on Panama letting ships through. I think they will let through. So the issue is the CDC. So I think within the next 10 days to 2 weeks. I saw something about Celebrity Apex in December. The same question again, is I guess we just have to wait. The cruise lines, what I think was also interesting is when the cruise lines announced, when Clear announced that they were voluntarily, or they were sort of taking off their initiative to cancel cruises through to September, they did kind of strongly indicate that they thought this would be rolling. So I have cruises through to the end of the year, and I have kind of in my mind assumed that these are not very likely. And until we see a statement from the CDC, that's the basis I'm working on. So what I'm not doing is paying final balances for cruises, because I don't want to put my money into a cruise which is taking 90 days. I'm still waiting for money back from Holland America, from Norwegian. I got money back from Royal Caribbean, and Cunard. And I actually took Future Cruise credit with Cunard and with Virgin to rebook. But then I'm not paying final balances on. So if these cruises are coming up, I move them. I use the policy to move them rather than lock up money. Peter's replying to my question on Australia. It's 2:18 a.m. Very, very, very impressive. Very, very impressive. And I wanted to, I'm just going to go back a little bit and make sure that I am covering questions that are coming up. Let's take a look. Michael also asked a question. I'm very envious of this. Booked celebrity flora in the Galapagos in November. I have heard nothing about Galapagos, so unfortunately I can't answer that. I know that all Galapagos cruises are on hold, and that's, I guess, is key because you got to fly into Galapagos. And so I know Galapagos is on freeze, and I haven't seen it listed anywhere about it opening up yet. So that's something I will keep, because I guess it depends on Ecuador opening up again. I'm going to come back to this guideline. So Wedgwood Swepston, thanks for all the updates. Pleasure. Just wonder how the guidelines will work if one of you is under 65 and one is over, and also for mixed parties. Just to recap, in case you didn't hear that at the beginning or haven't watched the video, in the new EU guidelines, they do talk about, I've actually got the quote, and I've got it here. I'm going to read you the actual quote because I thought someone would ask. So they're in the actual document that they've issued. They have, and this is a direct quote from the document. Activities and services on board cruise ships could be organized according to age group, so that older individuals are separated from other age groups. And in the document, they talk about encouraging cruise lines to get travelers who are aged 65 or older to seek medical advice for fitness to travel. It didn't expressly talk about having a certificate. If you remember, just before the shutdown, they were requiring all passengers 70 and over that they had to actually get a physically signed medical certificate, which I'm guessing a lot of doctors probably would feel very uncomfortable signing, just for they'd be worried to be sued or whatever. In the document, they also do talk about people over 65 being separated out and having separate activities and perhaps dining together. So almost forming a little cohort of people. And the point that Wedgwood raises is, of course, this assumes that everyone aged over 65 is traveling with someone over age 65. But of course, as we know, multi-generational cruising is really fast and popular, growing. So you've got, someone is over their 60s, someone probably in their 40s or 50s, and then you've got kids and whatever. What they did say was that it really doesn't answer it. And I think this is one thing that the cruise lines are going to really push back on. What we might see more of, which the guidelines also talk about, which to me seems a little bit more sensible because it also ties with what we're certainly used to on land, is where you work more with households or groups of people traveling together. So for example, the guidelines did say that you couldn't share tables with strangers. Often you share with other people, either you put it with other people or you're asked if you want to share with other people. What they specifically said is in the dining room, you could only share with either people that you're in the same cabin with or with a group of people traveling together. So I guess linked bookings. And I suspect that may be more the way that the guidelines, you can see cruise lines saying, okay, we're going to organize dinner around a table where people on the same linked bookings could be together, or perhaps they'll, because they talk about having social distancing in the theatre, where they're talking about having the 1.5 meter rule. So the theatres are going to be, I know theatres in the UK are saying, with the 1 meter rule, they'd be like almost half empty or between a third and half. So, but what they might do is have you book the theatre, but you can book as groupings. That to me seems the only way out of it. So there was nothing specifically in the document around that, but it does feel one of those things that, it just doesn't really make sense. Let's say hello to Ilana. I'm going to call out Ilana. Ilana has a YouTube channel which I strongly recommend you take a look at. Ilana, maybe you can also tap in there. If you pop in, Ilana, a comment with your YouTube channel, then I can just bring that up a little bit later and show people. So Ilana has a great YouTube channel. I was using Ilana's channel. I followed for a while. I've used Ilana's channel. They've done a lot of stuff with Royal Caribbean and the private islands, and I had a whole lot of cruises lined up to go those, and I've been devouring those videos, and of course they all got cancelled. So Ilana also has some very interesting videos, which I also recommend you take a look at. And Ilana might remind me of his name. A guy who lives, or was, I guess not anymore, was living pretty much all year round on Royal Caribbean. And she did a series of interviews, which have been a big hit on YouTube, with what it's like to live on a cruise ship. And I often get asked that question around, what's it like to live on a cruise ship? And Ilana's done a whole series of Q&As with that. So that's something I strongly recommend you take a look at. It's really entertaining. And so Ilana, maybe if you could pop that in, and I'll bring up your channel so people can go and take a look at that quite easily. So Lana's asking me a question just under that is, if you could pick your first sailing to be back cruising, what would you pick? This is a really interesting question. It's one that I actually ask myself every day. And I guess I answer in two ways, one of which is what I think is going to be practical and possible to do, because obviously I'd love to do one that's practical and possible, and the one that I would really like to be doing. If I could pick my first sailing to do, it would be sailings that are up and running, definitely up and running, and have all the kind of protocols sorted out. So, for example, one of the cruises that I was actually looking at is Iceland have given the go-ahead for expedition cruises to sail in Iceland. And Ponant have sent a ship up there. It's a brand new ship. I forget the name of it offhand. It is in my video. It's a brand new ship, so it's its maiden voyage. Maiden voyage is the wrong word. It's its maiden season. And what they're doing is you fly into Iceland. Now, to go into Iceland, you do have to have a COVID-19 test at the airport, and you get the results within 5 hours. And so what they're doing is they're screening everyone coming into Iceland. Iceland has very, very low incidence of COVID-19. Before you board the ship, you're therefore cleared and get on the ship. And they have lots and lots of protocols which they'd already put in place. But it's an amazing itinerary all around really remote parts of Iceland. Unfortunately, it costs around, even in the share cabin, it costs around about $1,000, or is it over $1,000 a day? So it's really hefty expensive. But certainly something like that, what I'm expecting to do is I think we're going to quite soon see local cruises happening. So, for example, around the UK, I think what we're going to see happen is UK cruise lines will agree with the UK government to call on UK ports. So all the regulations, all the rules, all the passengers, they can just control it much more. Ponant are also due to, and we're waiting for final okay, do the same thing in France. We've seen Hurtigruten do it in Norway. So one of those cruises I would definitely go out on. So if Saga or Pinot or Cunard or whatever announced that they were going to do a cruise just around the UK for UK passengers, I would be on that. I want to be on one of the early cruises, partly because I really want to get back, but also I want to be able to document and experience and record what it's like. So that would probably be it. One of those guaranteed, signed off absolute cruises would be the thing. So it'd be interesting to know what other people think to that question. If you could choose a cruise, what would your cruise be? I mean, I've lost so many great cruises, the Caribbean, which I was looking forward to. I've got some Mediterranean cruises, which I know will go. They're due in September. They're going to go. And I do also have Antarctica due in November, which I'm not really sure is going to happen. So let's have a look. Lots of questions about exotic cruises. Mark was asking the question about exotic cruises, and I sort of touched a little bit on it, Margaret, with that, but it's a really good question. Do you think the more exotic cruises, which don't have traditional ports, such as the Galapagos, will still happen this year? And certainly, I think it is possible. So if you take a look at the ones that have already got the go-ahead, the sign-off by governments to start, they are in that exotic area. The downside, of course, is they're very expensive to go to. So, for example, French Polynesia has opened to international tourists. You do have to have a COVID-19 test done, I can't remember if it's 72 or 48 hours, so basically before you board the plane, and you have to have that same certificate to get on the ship. It's Paul Gauguin ship, which is now part of Ponant. But that's a very beautiful, cruise. They're doing 2 cruises initially for locals, and on the 28th, 29th, they're starting with the 10-night international. You've got the Iceland cruise that I spoke about kicking off. We've also got in Norway, we've got those cruises. So Hurtigruten have opened up originally for Norwegian passengers, but they've just started up a cruise, which is actually sailing as we speak, which started out of Hamburg. It's a 2-week cruise. It's got German guests only. I think it's about 50% capacity only. And they're sailing from Hamburg up to Norway, up to Norwegian fjords, but they're not doing any landings. So it's, again, a slightly more exotic expedition cruise. They're doing stuff on RV boats, kayaking. Of course, there's beautiful scenery and lots of lectures on board. So that's sort of not quite, I guess, what you mean by exotic cruises. So it does feel to me like some of those could start up. In fact, I've got another in my email today, I got another thing, which is an exotic cruise for Svalbard, right up, which is up in the Arctic Circle. Those cruises are also starting up again, expedition cruises, so exotic cruises. So I think you're right, partly because there's often only one port of entry, which can be controlled, like Iceland, which is doing the COVID-19 test, or French Polynesia, or the same as Svalbard or whatever. So they have one port of entry, few people on the ship. They can screen people, passengers from the ship. There's not lots of ports of call where people can interact. So I think you're right. Keeping an eye on it. Of course, it is kind of expensive. I want to talk about a point that KB's asking no questions. KB's asked if I'm going to be doing live stream on Sunday. I'm starting to do it on the Friday and see how that goes. And if I find that Sunday becomes preferred, I'll switch it back. So I'm sort of experimenting with days, times. So I'm going to do Fridays for a while and see how that goes, to answer your original question. So KB is saying, did you think the COVID-19 cruise documentary on UK TV last night was rather anti-cruising? So for those people who don't know or not based in the UK, there was a documentary which ITV, which is the main commercial channel, terrestrial commercial channel, ran, which is called $1 Billion Cruises All at Sea. And it was set up originally, because I know some people were approached that I know, to be on it, as a balanced look at what happened with the outbreak on board. It kind of, the name to me suggested it would be a kind of an anti-cruising documentary. I watched it. For those of you who in the UK have watched it, you can watch it on Catch Up, and I suspect it will appear in other countries as well on other channels. It was really set up. It started quite well at telling the factual story around how cruises were selling before people really realized what was happening with COVID-19. People got on board, that people really understand the risks, people kept selling, and then it's sort of how it sort of multiplied and accelerated, and some of the mistakes that were made with the benefit of hindsight around it. But it came out as pretty anti-cruising. If you watched that, KB, if you watched that cruise, it'd be interesting to know what you thought. Following it, also comments on Twitter, I know a lot of people gave up about halfway through. Cruising fans gave up halfway through. Shorty 12341. Do you think Americans will be allowed into the EU in 2021? Not sure in 2021. Just for those who may want to know the background to that, is the EU launched a list. Launched is the wrong word. Released a list of countries that are allowed to come into the EU. The US was excluded, and I think also China, Russia, and some of the South American countries were excluded. Certainly the UK today, so those EU were for the Schengen zone. The Schengen, I think it's 22 countries or 20 odd countries in the EU, which theoretically have no borders. So you only have to really pass through the border once, and then you can move around freely. So they lifted it for themselves, and they lifted it for another countries, and expressly excluded the US. And I think that list gets reviewed every 2 to 3 weeks. So certainly, I think it's going to be like that for a while. If it extends to 2021, I guess it depends what happens in the US. The UK issued their list today, as I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, and the US was also excluded. On the other flip side of that, the US is also excluding people from the EU and the UK. So I suspect there's some of that, negotiation to go on. Eleanor Osterhout, can you comment on the likelihood of small ship river cruises within the US starting up, especially if they're under 250? Absolutely, I can. The good news is, yes, is the answer. The Mississippi is starting up, unless something else happens and it gets canceled. It's starting up this month. And it's the American River Cruise Company is starting up. They were due to start much further, somewhere in another region, which was cancelled because the state brought in new regulations and didn't allow it. But at the moment, certainly they're ready to go. The last cruises, though, were cancelled within like 24, 48 hours notice, because I know someone who's due to go on those. There's actually someone who works for Cruise Critic, was due to go on that cruise, and they literally got told, I think it was less than 24 hours, just over 24 hours. So yes, there is a plan to start up. And also what's important, and the reason Eleanor asked the question on 250 is when I was talking about the CDC no sail rule, no sail order, it applies to ships that carry more than 250 passengers. So with fewer than 250 passengers are not covered by that, so they can start up. So we've seen the river cruising companies in the US looking at starting up, and also Uncruise, which also carries fewer than 250 passengers, are hoping to start in Alaska as well. And again, to go into Alaska, you have to have a COVID-19 test or a 14-day quarantine. So they absolutely are starting up. So unless the state closes down and doesn't allow, because I guess some states are closing pubs and restaurants or whatever. So definitely they are starting up. So, but the one that has announced it most is the American Cruise Line. So they're definitely the one to look at. So I'm just having a look. David's put up those quotes from the thing we were talking about earlier. Thanks, David. I'll put those quotes up. Mira was referring earlier to over the 65 years old. So he's actually put the quotes in. So I'll bring that up. Thanks for that, David. So have I missed one? Sorry. Let me go back one. There's a series of these. So also quoting from the EU document I was talking about, in order to limit interaction among passengers, among crew, and between crew and passengers, it may be possible to divide passengers and crew into cohorts with appropriate numbers of people. Each group could be given scheduled times for food service, embarking and disembarking, and participating in some onboard activities. It is not possible to maintain separate cohorts/groups on board. Cohorts/groups should be maintained for shore-based activities. Interaction between each cohort should be avoided as much as possible. This will help in the management of any potential COVID-19 case and their contacts, and should help limit the number of exposed persons as well as tracing possible contacts. So thanks for putting that up, David. Just sort of a boring dancing question up. Let me get rid of my boring dancing question. So thanks for putting that up. So as you can see, there's this discussion around creating these cohorts, creating these kind of groupings. As an aside, if you're interested, they did also talk about members of crew who fall into this category should not be given passenger-facing roles as well. So they were also looking at that. Paul, how can the cruise line force people, I assume that's PO means people, must have Massachusetts in the United States. We have a law called HIPAA law that does not allow a company to see medical history. Just to clarify, I think what the document said was not so much that you can see medical history, but you needed to consult a doctor. So I think you're right, is you would have to I guess the idea is they're trying to screen out what the document calls out. It calls out a number of specific, they call out over 65-year-olds. They also talk about people with cardiovascular problems, diabetes, inflammatory issues, and also people with compromised immune systems. So I guess they're trying to call out those people, which is why they're talking about the medical document. So what certainly was the case, for example, what Ponant do, and I had this similar thing when I did Antarctica with Silversea last year, is I had to fill out a document, a medical document, which I had to declare conditions, etc. That was a self-certification. What Ponant have, though, is they require your medical professional to actually fill it out and do it. So I guess it's less, they're trying to get you to declare medical conditions. So I don't know how that fits with the law, but I think that's what they're trying to do. So I think it's and I guess if in terms of forcing it, which I guess Paul's asking is, they can make it a term of travel, I guess, is it can be one of the conditions of travel that you have to provide whatever. So then you have the choice. I think the big issue, which is concerning, which is a point that Tina has raised, which is always the big discussion when they would talk about introducing these certificates before science certificates, is doctors are probably going to be very reticent to sign a document which says that they think it's fine for you to travel, because they don't know what's going to happen. And I guess in some countries there's liability. I can understand a doctor being happy to sign a document, which is what the Ponant document was, saying Gary has these things, because he's not, all he's doing is stating a fact and confirming a fact. So I think that's That's going to be the key. M Sparks asking, what's the status of river cruising in Europe for summer of 2021 since we rebooked for next year? At the moment, I think it's all go. In fact, river cruising has already started this year, so I think there's a lot of precedent to say it's going to move ahead. It started in a very small way, though, this year. It started initially on the Rhine with Nico Cruises, started up for German passengers. Rosa, though, started up. They've run cruises in Douro, again, targeting more German passengers. They've also started up now on the Rhine and the Danube. And I feel there's one more, but I can't remember. And then we've also got across Europe, which are starting up. Oh, that's right. Sorry, they haven't started up. They will be starting up after the 11th of July in France. France, their medical emergency or state of medical emergency, it ends on the 11th of July, and they're not renewing it. That then means that river cruising is allowed to start. So Rosa starting on the Seine in the 15th, and across Europe are starting up in France on the 15th, and they're also starting up in a limited way across the Rhine and the Danube, and they will be starting only in Douro in August. So I think you should be pretty confident, unless things go completely crazy that we can't predict. But river cruising is certainly getting in its stride. The river cruising lines that are not starting up currently are ones that are very reliant on the US traveler, because obviously with the borders, no US travelers coming in. I've been on cruises like on Avalon, Uniworld, Viking, Emerald. They are pretty much full of, I would say 80, 90% Americans. If it's 80%, it's probably another 10% Australians. Australians aren't allowed to travel into Europe at the moment because Australia won't let them. US people can't travel. So those cruise lines, I think, are struggling much more with starting up. But I think by then it would basically be done. I just want to pick up on a point that Charles is saying. I'm absolutely not saying. So what Charles is saying, basically what you seem to be saying, that who would be 73? Anyone who would be 73 should probably think of something other than cruising. I'm certainly not saying that. I think what the document is saying is they're starting to put in lots of hurdles for people over the age of 65. This is something that came up just before the cruising shutdown, when they brought these certificates. We had, I guess in the US, we had the government saying if you're over 70, you shouldn't be cruising. In the UK, we had the government saying if you're over 70, you shouldn't be cruising. So I think undoubtedly there needs to be some kind of agreement between the health authorities and the cruise lines with the final rules. I think it's going to be very, very hard for people over 65, over 70 to go cruising if the health authorities are putting that medical certificates in the way. But also, which is another big hurdle, is insurance, because most cruise lines also require you to have insurance if you're to go on board, and it's very difficult to get insurance. A lot of insurance is not including COVID-19, and certainly finding insurance if people are aged 70 or older is quite a challenge. And it was always a challenge, like when I go cruising with my mum, she's 82 this year. Even getting cruises when she was in her late 70s was a challenge. If that is an issue, which is a very interesting one, however, is Saga Cruises in the UK. So Saga Cruises in the UK, they targeted the over 50s, but they are very, very strong, very popular amongst people in their 60s, 70s, and even into their 80s. What Saga have done to solve the problem of insurance is Saga ultimately is an insurance company. And what Saga have done is they have always bundled insurance into their fare because they knew it was a challenge. And they have expressly said that their insurance is going to be included in their cruising and also will cover any COVID-19 related issues. Now, Saga Cruises sell only out of the UK, so they have some, I guess they always come back into the UK and pretty much all UK passengers. So I'm not saying that, but I just worrying that a lot of those regulations and things were seeming to discriminate. I want to be strong on that. Certainly put a lot of hurdles in the way of people 65 and over. And I am 61 years old, and that 65 number is approaching fast. So I'm also hoping that they make sure that they don't start discriminating against us in our 60s, let alone in our 70s. This is a really interesting question, and one that has not been answered. And I guess the cruise lines will need to answer this question. So WAM Blue, if you don't meet the guidelines, will you have compensation for the cruise? Also, if they decided at cruising at less than full, who decides who isn't going? So let's talk about those two questions, because these are really good and interesting questions. At this point in time, it's not clear what the situation is if you're refused boarding. Now, I'll be trying to find out, for example, with the Ponant cruises, which I mentioned are due to start up both in Iceland and in France. What happens if you get turned down? There's not a lot in the documentation yet. So I've actually specifically asked that question. In the bigger documentation, all it says on this issue is that it needs to communicate, cruise lines need to communicate what the arrangement is for people who are refused boarding. But what they're also saying, which I think is really important, is also saying that you need to make it more flexible and easier for people to either pull out at short notice because they have issues, they're not feeling well, or they need to isolate, or if they're refused entry. The other thing that the document does say, however, if you're at a specific port and there are testing, because they do talk about doing testing, and people need to quarantine, there has to be a facility to quarantine people, which the cruise line has to arrange. So that implies that there's some sort of built-in thing there. What I think we all should be asking for and waiting to see and looking out for very carefully is, what is the situation if we need to cancel? As you know, at the moment, I guess in many countries, you know, if there's an outbreak, it's happening in Melbourne at the moment, it's happening in the UK, there's some local lockdowns, there's a track and trace system where you might get contacted to say you have to go into quarantine. And what I'm trying to understand is, what happens if a week before I'm due to go on a cruise, I get the call that says I have to go into quarantine, or I can't travel? What's really interesting is the travel, it's not clear if travel insurance pay for that. So I think the cruise lines are going to come with policy. So to answer your first question is, we don't know the answer to that. And this is going to undoubtedly be a key question that needs to get answered. On the second question, who decides who isn't going? Again, we don't know that. What I have seen, though, a couple of things. First of all, cruises are generally not sold out at this point in time. There are certain ones that were sold out. So I guess what cruise lines are going to start doing, and there's some signs have already done that, is they're reducing inventory. So I saw an interview with Richard Fain from Royal Caribbean. He's the head of Royal Caribbean Group, and he spoke about how they would hold back inventory. There were some indications originally when August was still selling. Before that got closed down, Carnival, some of the cruises, Carnival cruises, some went off sale. This is way before the cancellation, and that could also mean that cruises were, starting to hit those numbers. So we don't know that at this point in time. I think also we're going to see, if you bear in mind with flexible policies, there's probably a lot of people who've booked way ahead. I mean, I think someone else had said earlier, they booked for 2020. Where are we now? 2021. As things come closer, they may not want to cruise, so you might get people dropping out. I think again, we don't know that. I'm looking good for 61. Thank you. Good lighting, I believe. David was answering the question about the HIPAA. I'm trying to remember HIPAA because when I used to work, when I was working full time, I used to work for Johnson & Johnson. I was in the consumer side, but I remember this HIPAA law being a massive issue with medical information generally in the corporation. So my law training is for England and Wales, not the US. However, my understanding of HIPAA is that it controls disclosure of medical information by healthcare providers and connected itineraries, and disclosure of the patient's request, I believe, are not covered by HIPAA. It's a condition of the travel agent. You need to provide a health report to the company that has the right to refuse. So I think it's going to be a lot around that issue there of declaration and not declaration. So let me go back and take a look, and because I've been scrolling down, and see if there's any key questions that I have missed out and left out. So I apologize if I have. Let's see, I've done that. Which is cruises already spoken about. CMB. Robert's asking a question. This is picking up on a point about cruise and maritime voyage. Basically, cruise and maritime voyage is, they had 4 ships. They actually had 3 at a time, and one heading into Tilbury in London, where they were holding up for the while cruising was shut down. They were also struggling for cash. They hadn't got any of the government loans, and they were looking for money. And there was quite a lot of people on board, crew on board, who'd been there for a very long time. They also, I think they were largely Indian crew, and repatriation was not possible because the country wasn't going to let them in. So there was lots of issues about crew safety, crew health, morale, all that kind of stuff. So actually the authorities kind of raided the ships. They sort of impounded them for a period of time while they did an investigation, and they stopped one of the ships leaving. That seems to have been settled overall. So there's been no more kind of news on that, but it seems to have been resolved. A question on pricing. I'm going to talk more generally about pricing. So Aldon K. Hi from Norway. I was thinking to book an Antarctica cruise with Hurtigruten in November 2022. Do you think the price will increase, and should I wait? What I would largely recommend you do is wait until there is certainty around the whole process of cruising before necessarily committing to a major cruise like that. The deposit on Antarctica cruises is enormous. So talking about like the Antarctica cruise that I got in November, I paid many thousands of pounds, dollars, as a deposit. So it's a really big commitment, even just at the deposit phase. Now, I haven't looked at the ins and outs of Hurtigruten. So what I've seen a lot of them doing is pushing the, sort of the coming season, they're pushing the final payment date up. But it's quite a big commitment. I would wait, and I would let it settle down. I would even see if the Antarctic season this year is likely to happen or not, or is it going to become like the Alaska season, not happen. Prices are going to be extremely volatile all over the place. I generally think that we are still going to see the overall demand for cruising is going to be dampened. So I guess we're all big fans of cruising, keen to get cruising again. But generally speaking, I think demand is not going to be huge. We don't know how many ships are going to be. So I would wait a little bit. And just once we're clear the season's running, once we know things are operating, that's when I would really start to looking to commit. The other thing I would say is once you do book a cruise, and I'd say that I think in every of the live streams so far, is make sure you track pricing. And there's a couple ways you can either do it manually yourself, get your agent to do it. There's a couple of websites that I use. One is called cruisewatch.com, or you can actually even do it on Cruise Critic, and they give you the chance to set up an alert. So once you've booked a cruise, it tells you if prices are going up, but more importantly, if prices are coming down. So I've already seen for a couple of my 2021 cruises, I've had a number of alerts where I'm seeing prices going down. So lots of people are talking about, 2021 is really busy. Cruise lines saying, book now, the prices are fantastic. But I have seen for my 2021 cruises, the prices keep coming down. So I would wait. I would definitely wait on that one. So let's take a look if I have missed any other key cruises. What percentage of cruise passengers are over 65 would this not cause the cruise line problems? I don't know the exact number. I did know the exact number at one point, but it's a very large percentage. Many of the cruise lines, the average age of cruising overall, even in the US, which is a little bit younger, even in Europe, which is a little bit younger, the average age of cruising is into the late 40s, into the 50s. And that's even in places which have, lots of family cruises, so that shakes it out. A lot of the big cruise lines, their average age is sort of into the 50s and the 60s. So it's a very large percentage. So absolutely, for some of those cruise lines, you look at Holland America, even Princess, Cunard, Fred Olsen, Saga, Seabourn, whatever they are extremely reliant on that kind of baby boomer generation. That's why, so it's a very large percentage. I'll try and actually dig out the numbers specifically. I did have the numbers. I don't have those to hand. So just in terms of, thanks so much if you've joined me on the live chat. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for your comments. We've been doing this now for an hour. This is the 6th one. There will be another one next week. I will try and check if there's any questions that I've left. Thanks for all of your interaction. Just to let you know, if you want even more, I'll keep the live stream up on the channel for a week. So you can also, if you want to go back, look at it or you can join for part of it. On Sunday, just to let you know, if you're looking for more cruise, just to remind you, there is that cruise. Sorry, I've got the chat up. Let's try and get rid of the chat. So we are. There we go. So the video that's up at the moment is that massive cruise updates, which goes into more detail of the EU thing. And the video out on Sunday is seaborne cruises. So a little bit more normal kind of cruising thing. So I'll talk a little bit about seaborne cruises and some of the key differences there. Thanks so much for joining me on the live chat. I hope you have a great weekend and watch lots of cruise content. And let's plan and look forward to when we can go cruising, which hopefully will be sometime this year at least. So take care and goodbye.